Relative constancy. Pi is only so big. Originally, now this one shifted a little bit, and it gives you pause for thought. A little bit different. Illustrates a little bit the difference between theory and how practice happens. The theory was that in America, for example, there was a finite slice that could go to what we would call entertainment, information, discretionary spending. Everything else had to be spent for food, education, healthcare, mortgage, insurance. Right? And it was roughly about 3% that could go for entertainment and information. Okay? And this proposal was originally put out in the early 80s. Since then, that size of that slice has almost doubled. Americans have gone up to, in 20 years, about 5 or 6% of total income for that segment, information and entertainment. We spend more. And that's sort of in violation of this principle of relative constancy. It wasn't constant. We've doubled that amount. I hate to say this because it doubled. But you'd think that it'd have to stop. You'd think that this would have to now kick in. Because the price of nothing else has gone down 20%. Right? So you'd think we'd pretty much expanded that piece as big as it can get. Because now everything else kicks in. Healthcare and right? Tuition and all the rest. So then the problem becomes what the original principle was, and that's that anything new cuts out of the old. So if you're going to spend money on new media, it's going to come out of your old media budget. Okay? And I'll give you one example of that. Our blinds are closed, so you can't look across the street, but you know, if you cast your eyes across the street at that big box store right over there, they're out of business. And it isn't just with this one that's closing. They're on the very brink of bankruptcy at Blockbuster because you moved your dollars from going over there to getting it from Netflix or Redbox or online. And Netflix and Redbox won't be around long in terms of getting you a physical disc. It just moves. But as it moves, it takes down the old guys. Okay? That's what the old guys are worried about. That's what old media really worries about. Its ad dollars are moving away from what we've had as a successful business model and going into something that we don't understand how to support it. There's not enough revenue being generated. So the movie guys aren't too worried about it yet because they can do an avatar and make big dollars with people going out to theaters. But notice how that that's a foolery. In order to get those dollars, how much was that ticket at that 3D theater? Yeah, it outsold everything. But one of the reasons it outsold everything was a $12 ticket at a lot of theaters because it went into a 3D theater. They forced all those. Then you look at the bottom line, all those theater owners. They had to force all those theater owners to put that junk in first. It cost them millions. I mean, it's an industry just screaming because they're not selling nights out at the movies like they were. Okay, so now we get 3D TV. Maybe they can move those in. All right. The principle was, of course, that new media would be, before I get to push-pull, sorry. The difference between new and old, right? Basic fundamental difference. So I think with the book, you're pretty well versed in the differences such that we don't have to spend too much time harping on it. We knew about the broadcast model, and it worked for a long time. You cast a real wide net. You collect many, 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 many eyes. You sell that to advertisers. You push the content, but the content that's pushed is demographically segmented, right? In a predictable way because of the program. So you knew who watched, listened, or bought what, exposed themselves to what magazine, listened to what radio program, watched what television program. You knew the time part. You knew what you could charge. It wasn't a perfect science. Sometimes you charge too much, you charge too little. The audience wasn't as big as you thought. The program failed. There were things that went wrong. New media works a different way. It costs a lot more for a smaller aggregated audience. There's a bigger potential audience because you got the potential for a global audience. But the aggregated audience is much smaller. Generally speaking, you don't get the same number of people watching the same thing because, as Garfield pointed out in that piece, there are so many choices. There's so many places you can go, as opposed to 18 channels or even 100 channels, right? So you get a smaller base audience. It targets real specific users. The thinking was that material is more pulled by users, although that's changing a little bit. But the initial thinking was that when I click on a site, I want to watch some content, I want to expose myself to stuff. I've gone there on purpose and I'm choosing it from among the array, and it's really what I want. Now, as new media designers have put in more non-pulled stuff, right, that equation's changed a little bit. So now I don't get just a few ads, I get all kinds of stuff coming into the page that I didn't really want. Okay? Then the two big cultural features, which we're not altogether clear about. There was a degree to which television, radio, newspapers were collaboratively designed. Because of the mass audience, everybody got exposed, not everybody, but a large number of people get exposed to the same thing. It's kind of cultural collaboration that goes on there. We sort of got one view of everything. Now, it might have been the wrong view, right? But it was one view. I just read a piece this morning. I wish I'd have grabbed it for this. That argues that television, and there's this argument that television doesn't educate very well because it doesn't have content very well. I think we've already talked about it a little. We'll talk about it some more. But there's this idea that you can't teach very well on television. And the article said, wait a minute. Facts, yes. But general cultural trends, and in the next 10 to 20 years, television will be the most educational medium on the planet because of the cultural changes it will bring to folks who generally haven't watched much television yet. Because when television comes, generally speaking, gender relationships change altogether in a culture. Because women are treated differently in a television environment than they are usually in the everyday life of developing countries. So as the developing countries get television, everything changes. So there's this cultural collaborative thing that happens with mass broadcasting. As opposed to me, and very specifically, as opposed to me laying on my bed last night, watching the Lakers on my computer. Yeah, downstairs on ESPN. But I was upstairs, in bed, alone, watching on my computer because I could. Because Kings were on the internet radio at the same time and I could listen to the Kings game and watch the Lakers. Can't do that in front of television. Isolates and individualizes. I get what I want, but it's just my little box. Okay? As opposed to sitting around the campfire and everybody watching the same program. And then you multiply that out by the culture. And it's a different kind of effect. Now, in some ways it kind of appeals to us as Americans. The Marlboro individual. And so in some ways it really plays to our ethos. Okay? But it really destabilizes some other cultures. How many of you know Dr. Zahouri upstairs? Dr. Zahouri is from Iran. He tells some stunning stories. I'll try to make it really brief. Ali tells a stunning story about growing up in Iran. There is a cultural practice in his country that was millennia old. I don't mean centuries, I mean millennia of the men gathering in coffee and tea places and telling stories in the afternoon. It had been done as long as Iranians could remember their history. And he tells a story about the day that it changed. And he walked in, and what changed it was there was a television up on the shelf. And the men came in and didn't tell stories, they watched TV instead. And everything about their culture changed. Now, of course, everything didn't change, but everything about that tradition, that getting together every day, that what they did, what they told, what they shared, how they changed as they moved from telling stories about their lives and their history to watching Dialing for Dollars. Okay. So we originally thought that, you know, the interactive media would all be pull, and that's just not worked out that way. Because originally it was. You just didn't get anything that you didn't want. You blocked it, you know. The first internet, early in the internet, there was no commercial. If there was any commercialism at all, we flamed them, right? And everybody just shut them down, you know, but everything's changed. So perhaps pushing and pulling is sort of evening out between new and old media. You get a few more choices in old media and a few less choices or more push stuff in new media than we thought. That equation has changed just a little bit. Okay. All right, got to go.